This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks for all those who subscribe and listen to our podcast, especially our Patreon supporters. If you'd like to make a monthly donation on Patreon, please do so. Also, like and subscribe to us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Father Joseph Anthony, welcome.
Howdy. How you doing?
Not bad. Yourself?
Yeah, we're doing
How's
it.
New York City going?
New York City's good. It is definitely a city that never sleeps.
Okay.
Yeah, which is kind of hard to sleep. But I'm getting used to the city, and I've been able to get out into it. I've had a lot of New York City pizza, which I love.
Do you have a particular place that you...
The best place is actually probably the in our neighborhood. So far, I've had Brooklyn Pizza Masters, I think is my highest rated one out there. So yeah, I definitely used the One Bite app to get a good sense of what are good pizzas.
One Bite app?
Yeah.
Was that like a...
Dave Portnoy from from Barstool, like he does his pizza reviews and stuff, and you know, it's just a way to gauge like what's worth your time or not. So I've had a number of places throughout the city, but so far my favorite has been actually the one that's in our neighborhood up on the Upper East Side. But yeah, New York City's great. I saw Hamilton on Broadway. I've been to Carnegie Hall, Madison Square Garden. So like, yeah, I feel like I'm getting used to it all.
Getting around. Okay, fantastic. And
walking on the streets is a full contact sport, and I'm here for it.
Yeah,
like for the record.
You know, and I do like the subway in New York as a sense of that. You know, it's old fashioned. You're in there and you're crowded and such, and there's a sense of like we're all going to respect each other, because if we don't like respect each other, we will die because we're too close together. It's too loud. Everything's too. We got to move too quickly.
Yeah.
There's sort of like etiquette in there that you don't always find in some metros or big subways. Like for instance, in DC, I find it to be less pleasurable than New York, even though New York subway is a heck of a lot harder to navigate and it's a lot more crowded. But there's something about, hey, we have to survive this event.
Yeah.
Whereas the metro here at DC is, you know, it's obviously we're gonna be fine, so I can do some foolishness.
Exactly.
But you can't fool around in the New York subway.
No, that's exactly it. Like you don't mess around on the New York subway, and everybody's like, okay, we're all on edge together on this, but like we're going to get through this.
That might be true. I mean, that might be true in New York in general. You just can't mess around in New York. You know, it's not a place for foolishness, which I like. I respect.
Yeah,
I respect
exactly.
that.
I love it.
We're gonna do this episode on what it means to be weird, or actually what the inherent weirdness of the Christian life. But I wanted to start with, other than the New York thing, although these might be related.
I was going to say they kind of bleed over a little bit.
Yeah. What's the and I can give mine if you want to give it a minute to think about it. But what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen? Like where you're like, "Whoa, this is weird." Have you had? I can start if you want.
Yeah, I was going to say you lead off, because I'm like, oh,
so maybe 2 years ago, maybe it was during COVID or something. I was driving down 95 or something down to Virginia from the House Studies, and I was driving along, and I looked out my left window, and there was a plane. You know, it's like flying.
Sure.
But what looked like it was flying, but actually, it was just holding still. It looked like literally, because obviously because of distances and such, like you're driving along and most planes look like they're only going 5 miles per hour, but it's because they're farther away and bigger, and they're actually going like 200 miles per hour, blah, blah. But this one was just like hanging out. So as I was driving with it, it just was floating basically.
Okay.
And I figured it was I figured surely this is an optical illusion. So I just kept like watching it. And it just never, the optical illusion never ended for me. And I thought, is this a balloon? It's not. It was a plane. Is there anything under? No, it's just it's one of those, like, there's a few things that I've like, I have in a mental notebook of like, all right, God.
Can you explain that to me when I get up
there? What
happened?
Yeah. Do you remember in 2022 or something? What was the deal with that plane thing, right? Give me the physics of the optics, because I study physics. I know about line of sight and how like perspective and changes. So I understand like when you're in a train and things look, slow.
When both trains are moving,
but
you feel like
I'll tell you, I was watching this thing for like 3 minutes. It was getting dangerous on the road, because I'm like, no, I'm gonna figure this out.
Right.
And I just eventually said, I don't know, floating plane.
Oh my gosh.
Full, DC-9 or something or whatever, 737, just kind of floating.
That's wild.
Yeah, that's like the creepiest or weirdest thing I think I've seen in a long time.
When I'm thinking back, and maybe it's just because your story is kind of putting me in that frame of reference, but the one experience I've had where I've kind of like had that kind of unsettling, like, this is odd.
Yeah.
I was driving from Washington, D.C. to Charlottesville, and it was at night. I think it was after a recording session, like hopped in the car, drove home, and I was on 66 out towards Dulles, so in that area.
Yeah, sure.
And I look up, and you're used to seeing lights from the planes come through. Yeah. You're used to seeing the stars and things like that. But there was like a set of stars that were in a perfect line.
Yes.
And just hovering. And I'm like, that's hovering over Dulles runways.
Yeah.
Like what? And as I kept going, they just kept like in this perfect angled line. And I was like, this is
why people think UFOs are real.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'm like, it was the same type of thing. I keep moving, they keep staying.
Yeah.
But they're so perfectly split. I'm
it's
like,
just not possible,
this is
random. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, is this how it all starts? This is the start of the end, right?
Yeah,
like,
this is it. Yeah.
Come to find out, they're just Starlink satellites. That's all those were.
Oh, good.
But it was really kind of disconcerting.
Yeah.
Like as you're driving like on 66, I'm like, oh, that's fun. Wait, they're still there. Oh gosh, no. What?
Yeah.
And so
Starlink. Well, that's it. Yeah. Satellite. Wow, fascinating. Starlink satellites. That explains that one.
Yeah.
But it's good to start in those two because you mentioned like weird or uncanny because the word weird, right? We tend to think of like creepy or something. I did a little research on this sort of thing, etymology. So who knows? Not that much research, but enough to go wonder. Yeah, where does this thing come from? And it turns out it's 14th century. Involving comes from initially weird sisters, which is kind of like a witch, and it refers to like a sort of uncanny supernatural power or fate. So like weirding is the power, like a magical power in a sense.
Interesting.
It's original to that, and I thought, this thing has totally changed meaning, obviously, because we don't mean that by weird, but you could see how the kind of just unfittingness and uncanniness, or like just not normal.
Yeah.
Like weird has has multiple connotations from like, oh, you're weird, like why'd you do that? You were stupid. To like, oh, that's weird. Like, how is that plane just floating?
Right.
And it has this like lack of fit, you could say.
Yeah.
And sometimes you could say with a supernatural development, but certainly a lack of fit with our daily experience. So I thought it'd be good to reflect on the inherent weirdness of Christianity, the Christian life, and maybe the Catholic life in general, but both, I suppose. Christianity is weird, and talk about how it is weird. Is that a negative thing? Is it a good thing? And what we make of all of that? And so what do you think when in weirdness in the Christian life?
I mean, Catholics are weird. Like we have to admit, like according to the normal way of life and the world as it exists and as it's lived out, like there's a lot of aspects of our Catholic faith that just kind of collide head on with this, and it's like that's weird. Like what are we doing here? Like whether it's the veneration of relics or the fact that we actually engage in penitential practices, not to punish ourselves or not to. We actually withhold good things for the discipline of our bodies and the integration of our bodies and souls in a sense. But it's like, that is so weird in the world's eyes, where it's like, no, you find good things and pleasurable things and you indulge in those. And there's so many aspects of the Christian life, whether it's our life of prayer, whether it's a life of virtue and penance, or our engagement with the saints and our kind of ethos of understanding the eternal soul, and also humanity and being a body, soul, a hylomorphic being. Like these things are radically weird. And like I said, there are moments where there's a head-on collision with the world as it is, a fallen world, but there's a head-on collision between those. And for many outside of the Christianity, many outside the faith, or even we could say inside Christian life, it's like, that's weird. Why are you doing that? Why are you kneeling at Mass? Why do you genuflect in front of a gold box? Like these are the types of things that for those of us that have grown up in the church in many sense, we just take it for granted. It's like, oh yeah, that's just what you do. But then when you take it like half a step outside of it, it's like, no, that's weird. Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, I take it in the philosophical sense that weirdness is a sort of relational category, such that it's always weird with respect to.
Yes.
So we can break down things too, like maybe this is a good way to do it. So we'll focus on first the weird, what we do think that's weird, and then talk about how sometimes weirdness can go wrong. So we'll talk about how weirdness goes right first, perhaps, and talk about the relation aspect of weird with respect to perhaps the world around us, and then maybe weird to our, say, Christian brethren. So we can start with like just Christianity being and the weird things, because as you say, you just kind of forget sometimes, I take it, that Christians do believe and do, think and act in weird ways, right? So maybe let's start with thinking about weird with relation to the average kind of the normal, so the kind of good old Johannine cosmos sort of thing. What strikes you as when you step back for a second and say, well, is this thing I think or do, or both, weird with respect to the kind of world that I've forgotten, but the minute I bring the world, oh yeah, I guess that is kind of weird. Because it's good to know that we have some weird practices so that we don't get caught off guard when people say, why do you? Although it is nice to go, I don't know, is that weird? Yeah. But in some ways it can be weird. So what do you think? What comes to mind when you think of what's weird with respect to the world?
Yeah, there's going to be, I would say, the vast majority of our Christian life, like how it's lived out and expressed. Definitely our worship, because our worship is, it's transcendental, where it's putting us in touch with the divine in a very particular way and kind of drawing us out of ourselves in various ways. But that's a weird experience. That's almost foreign. And I think there's a lot of different aspects of our Christian life that are foreign, whether it's our relationship to our dead, how we pray to the saints, or even pray to deceased family members and, pray for the souls in purgatory, where so much of the world is immediate gratification.
Yes.
Like, I want to touch this. If I can't touch this, it doesn't exist. If I don't see it, it doesn't exist. And so how do you deal with relationships that are intangible in that way? Now we then do recognize the tangibility of ourselves, because we are bodies and souls and we need the tangible. Yeah. But then how do we interact with that? Well, we have these sacraments that we reverence and we genuflect and we use holy water. And it's like, these are just ordinary people. Like, that's just water. And you're like, oh, no, I'm sprinkling it over. There's salt. Let's throw salt. It seems superstitious, which is kind of getting back to the 14th
weirdness,
century.
The uncanny business. The unfittedness.
In the reverence of saints or the relics, they're like, wait, that's somebody's bone. You're like, yeah, actually it's hair. I think hair is weirder relic than bone, but and there's all these aspects. But then let's even go a step further and just say, like, our patterns of life. Like, let's rest on Sundays.
Yes.
Like, let's do penance and not eat meat on Fridays. And it's like, well, why do you have dietary restrictions? It doesn't matter what you eat, as long as it's clean and healthy and good for your body. It's like, but what I also physically eat can affect my soul too. Yeah. And let me prioritize Sunday and make sure I get to Mass. And whether I'm traveling on vacation, there was a beautiful talk by Justice Scalia, and he was mentioning this, and he spoke of how a former president spoke of his religious affiliation of being Catholic. And he's like, no. Being Catholic isn't an affiliation that you can wake up one day and change affiliations or think about. It is who you are. Yeah. And it affects how you see the world, how you live in the world, and the patterns of life that you have. And for so many people in the world, it's going to not make sense. And we have to actually embrace that as a reality. Yeah. Like, our Catholic weirdness or our Christian weirdness isn't, we talk about it as being inescapable, but not inescapable of the sense of it's to be tolerated, but actually inescapable, similar to the cross. We don't just tolerate suffering and the cross in our life. We look to Jesus and how he embraced it and try to imitate him in embracing that. I think that we can recognize that the world hated Jesus, and the world will hate us as well. Yeah. But it will title it as, you're just being weird. Yeah. But like, there's a certain embrace of that, and not to be unafraid of being like, yeah, I'm a Catholic, and that means I rest on Sundays. I go to Mass for first thing on Sundays, or I don't eat meat and do penance on Fridays, or I'm actually concerned about my speech patterns, or other things like that. Like, these are the weird things that we can reveal our faith in who we are, not just a religious affiliation in anything, because it is who we are.
Yeah, that's right. I think it is nice to reflect on the weirdness and remind ourselves about it a bit. remember, and this is, you probably only find this if you're engaging with people who are not like you, because again, weirdness is a relative category. That means weird related to someone. So if you're used to, if you're in your own family and your own family has certain practices and such, you won't know that those are weird or different
until you encounter another family who doesn't do that.
Yeah, I remember I was playing a board game. Our family has like Parcheesi is a board game we used to play and a lot growing up, and our family has a practice of like, you help the other people. If you have to roll and you decide, okay, well, how should I move these moves? And your other team might actually, like, the other people's like, actually, you should probably do this sort of thing. So it's like, it never seemed weird to me. And I remember playing with one family that was a get together with some other with the in-laws, and like I was moving. My brother had a play to make or something, and I was like jumping in and saying, okay, but you should probably do this, even though he's on the other team.
Yeah.
And the other family member was like, well, just let us decide. It's like, oh yeah, I guess it is kind of weird to like play the game together. It's not, we're still competing. Like,
right.
When I send your piece out, I'm going to kiss the bottom of it and scorn you. But like, there was a sense of like, you didn't wait in silence and let the other person decide what to do. You offered advice or like, which is a different way. And it's weird with relation to how you might think that game could go. But if you just played my family, this is how games always went.
I mean, I remember as a kid going to one of my best friend's house and staying overnight, woke up the next morning, we had scrambled eggs for breakfast, and I looked at the plate and I was just dumbfounded. I'm like, what? Where's the ketchup? I need ketchup. Like, in my family, we always ate scrambled eggs with ketchup. He never did that. I was like, wait, you don't put ketchup on your scrambled eggs?
Yeah.
Like, that's how you serve. Yes. That is scrambled eggs.
Just scrambled eggs.
That's just what that is. Like,
yeah.
Why do I have to ask for this?
Yeah.
It was just such a weird experience.
And of course, it's not like, the best part is when you realize, like, oh, yeah, that is kind of different than the world. And you don't go, oh, I should do that.
Well, that's
but instead,
right?
You're like, oh,
do I need to be normal here?
Yeah, well, the question is, why don't you? So I think, and this is where it's another example of the kind of weirdness. I remember talking to a great man. He wanted to do some spiritual direction, and he was just coming back to the faith. And he had just great questions about, so when you pray, you're talking, like, you talk to someone that's not around?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'd never put it that way, but I mean, he is around, but, well, he's like, well, where is he?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, he's God. So he says, so he's
he
like,
dwells in you, but like,
yeah.
So
and he's
so I'm a crazy man that's just like, talking to myself now.
Yeah. So it's like meditate. So it's like kind of like meditation or mindfulness. And I said, no, not really. And but it forced me to try to figure out, like, well, how do I describe how God is around for me? And I thought, well, when I pray, it's like I know I'm in the presence of someone. It's a bit like when you're around a dead body, right?
Yeah.
It could be it's a family member or a friend, but when you're there with the casket, it just doesn't feel the same.
No,
right? It doesn't feel the same. And there's no personal presence, you could say, if we're going to do kind of Jasani liberation kind of stuff. And in the same way, so when you have a body but no person there, in a sense, God's like, there's no body, but there's a personal presence.
Yeah.
Right? You get a sense in the prayer. But it does seem when if you don't think about God at all, it seems kind of weird that way. I think some of our uncanniness as Christians does, or most of it, might be rooted in the fact that we do believe that, for instance, this world and what's around it is not all that important.
Right.
Yes, it's important, but because of the cross, right?
Yeah.
Because of the fact that the world can throw everything at God, and he can seemingly lose at that point. Well, of course he's going to resurrect it, but what we care about is salvation on the cross there. As that the resurrection is you could have the accepting of it, of course. But the cross in itself is not like, oh, shoot, don't worry, we're going to fix it with the resurrection. No. The cross is the solution. And that means that the suffering and death are not a horrible final end, but rather can be a means because we're more than just our flesh and bones and that kind of thing. And that is a belief, I take it, that is becoming weirder and weirder to the world. It was weird to the ancient Greeks, obviously. But it's getting weird. It's going to be weird and weirder again. I think we were used to it not being weird for a while as Christendom was around, but I think it is kind of weird. for them.
Now that we're no longer in Christendom, we're fully apostolic in that way. I think this concept that we're like resident aliens in this world, like this is not our homeland, but we do have to live here.
Yeah.
And there's a certain sense that like we do have to engage it, and there is good to be embraced in this world, but it's not everything. And like understanding ourselves as like, pilgrims or journeymen through this world with a destination that's other than, doesn't give us it's this like kind of tension that we always have to hold, where I think
priorities.
And with the rest of the world, this is everything.
Yeah.
And you have to make the best out of it. You have one shot, and this is all you get, and you have to kind of squeeze it for everything that it's worth. And there's a lot of pressure in that, where I find that there's a lot of freedom in being a Christian and saying like, this is my homeland, but I'm not a resident here, or I'm a resident here. This isn't my ultimate homeland.
Yeah.
Sorry, I flipped that.
Yeah.
But and I think that's a really important thing to recognize, because that changes how you engage with the world. That changes the optics through which you see everything. And for many who are not, and more who don't understand that kind of Christian worldview or have never encountered it, it's weird. And thus for us as Christians, us as Catholics, to engage in that and to be unafraid. Like there's such a herd mentality, like you were saying, like, okay, my growing up, like I put ketchup on my eggs. Now I experience somebody who didn't. Like, should I adjust myself to fit into what the rest of the world is doing? Like there's a herd mentality and a temptation to just fit in, because being a part of the herd is safety. But we have to kind of push back against that and kind of embrace our weirdness of saying, no, as Christians, I truly believe in a body and a soul. I truly believe that our life and our actions, our words have impact, and thus that affects how I interact with other people, my ethics and my morals of life and the priorities that I have, and thus how I live that out. Whether that is a societal, whether it is sexual ethics or things of that nature, like it has an impact on this. And there might be part of that, the consequences of that maybe we're not part of the herd.
Yeah.
Maybe we're outside that herd, and that's okay. And we actually should embrace that, encourage that, especially for, raising children, to lay this out in front of their children. Like, you're going to be weird. And it's Ash Wednesday, and we're going to go to Mass first. We're going to pull you out of school, go to Mass first, and you're going to wear ashes for the rest of your day.
Yeah.
Like that's weird, but that's recognizing the priorities of our life.
Yeah.
In acting in that mode.
Yeah, it is. And this is the Augustinian vision of the two cities, right? The city of God and the city of man. And I take it that the weirdness is based upon the fact that we generally dwell amongst the city of man, and that the city of God is the invisible kingdom that we're working towards, and we exist in the church and all of this. Because obviously in heaven, for instance, in weirdness is on the other side, right? Obviously. But since we are not there yet, we live in this vale of tears, and all this sort of stuff. You do have this different aspect. You could think of it as a sort of virtue, in the sense that you don't want to not be weird, right? So like we should realize that we believe that we're going to live forever, and you might think that's weird. Because as I tell the students, like I'm doing an example of this, sort of what immortality is about, is like if I'm driving in the car with a squirrel, I think of Groundhog's Day with Punxsutawney Phil and Bill Murray, right?
Yeah, I was going to say.
And we're driving the squirrel and we get hit by a Mack truck or something. All the images are bad, but they're hit by a Mack truck. Like, one of us carries on.
Yes.
Right? The squirrel, as far as I can tell, the squirrel is done.
Yeah.
If God wants squirrels in heaven, he can have them. It's not going to be the same squirrel, though,
no,
because that's
not.
a material being. But it's going to be, but I'm good. I'm not good. Like, I'm in bad shape. I'm dead. But me is still around.
Right.
I carry on. The squirrel is gone. I'm still there. Right? And that sounds totally crazy, but it's important, because it means that your decisions that you make in life should be based upon that reality, the Mack truck squirrel event, right? Such that you're going to live for at least as long after this life, in eternity, as you are here. Yeah. So if you say, well, this moral decision, this making this action, well, it will jeopardize my soul, but it'll be okay. It'll get me through here.
Yeah.
You should think, well, remember, your soul isn't, and this sounds like old-timey 1950s stuff, but I'm convinced it's true. But that we just are going to live for, heaven's at least 75 years long.
At least.
And therefore, even on just the pure calculation,
just the pure maths of it all, the numbers.
Okay. So we talked about the kind of, the fact that it's okay because one, weirdness is always relative to something else, and if the thing that's relative to is the fallen world, then you would want to be weird.
Yeah.
So the virtue says, look, don't go for the deficiency, like don't be not weird in a way. But of course, virtue has an excess too, because we want virtue. We should say one is the means. We want to avoid the deficiency, but also the excess. The question is. How does weirdness, I think this must be true, you can be too weird, right?
Yeah.
Because the weirdness is not an end in itself. The weirdness is about the truth of the gospel.
Yeah.
And the truth of the gospel is that God wants to save all humanity.
Yes.
And that we are instruments in his salvation process by sharing it. So maybe we've been doing the side of like, look,
it's good to be weird.
It's good to be weird.
Yeah.
But then we might say, but it's good not to be too weird. In what way do we mean by that? Because like believing that I survived the Mack Truck Swirl event is a lot of people are like that's too weird. I'm like no. Too weird is, and then like what are the dangers we could say? I guess with kind of the weirdness in Christianity.
I think part of that weirdness is like standing at a difference than the fallen world. Right, standing against it. Mm-hmm. But then I think the temptation is to become too weird in the sense that I'm no longer standing against it, but I'm going to create my own perfect world of what I think weird. Like I'm going to take this
kind of lean into total weirdness for weirdness sake.
Yeah, like now the world is all bad, so I have to create the good world underneath my own power, and thus I create this kind of silo, ghetto, bubble experience. And I think that is also, that's the excess of it. And saying like there's so much, the world has no good in it, and thus I have to create a certain kind of perfection of this as a total rejection of that. And so now I've created a place where my weirdness in the world is the normal, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say, if there's young kids that are brought up in that kind of experience and they're sent off to college or and they start to encounter the world and they've never encountered the fact that there are people other than them, that there are people that eat eggs without ketchup on them, then, that might be enticing. That might be, and so it hasn't given them a real experience of the fallenness of humanity. It hasn't given them a real experience of the brokenness and the fact that Jesus does come to redeem us and the entirety of the world together. And that we have to engage with that. So it almost pushes the reality that to be in the world and not of it, pushes that all the way out to the side that is not a reality. Yeah. And thus it makes you're putting each other at a greater risk in that sense. Because this understanding of like, okay, the two cities and the kingdom of God begins here, but it's not brought to completion. But in trying to bring it to completion in this world, and that is, putting yourself in such a siloed or experience that you're not actually engaging with others in this world. Yeah. Almost as an evangelical way, but a sharing and embracing of our Christianity and our Catholic faith as being something other than this world, but in it at the same time.
Well, I think this is the difference between, say, a cult or a Gnostic religion versus, say, Christianity, in the sense that you have a sort of dualism in the kind of cult Gnostic religions of, well, we're going to be weird, and the weirdness should have no relationship to the non-weird, you could say. Yeah. Whereas I take it Christianity, because grace builds upon nature, and not just builds upon it, but perfects it. Yeah. Such that we're only weird to those who are not weird yet, but the weirdness should be something they can embrace, because it's actually their problem. Like because they're not weird in the Christian way, like loving neighbor as thyself, loving God, the ways we talked about in the positive sense, but that they think that might be weird, but they actually are meant for this, right? And it should have, ideally, some attractiveness to it. The gospel is supposed to have some attractiveness because I'm still a human, even though I'm meant for eternity because God meant humans for him eternity. So the weirdness of Christianity can't be for its own sake of just total difference, because then you're denying your own humanity.
That's 1,000% it.
Right?
Yeah, the whole concept of like the weirdness of our Catholic faith or Christianity is being for its own sake. Like that, this is the whole purpose of it, is to be so radically different that it's like, no. It also needs to be almost, you use the term attractive, and I think so, absolutely. But I'll also say like intriguing or approachable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like those who are in the world should recognize how Christians love each other. Mm-hmm. And that should be intriguing. Like, well, why? What? But if it's so other than, for the simple sake of being other than, what is the world doing? I'll do the complete opposite.
Yep.
You know, the world makes music off of 808 drum beats. So I will never do that. I only listen to the classical non-lyrical music. It's like, why? Well, because the world does that, and that's the devil's music, and I'll do whatever the opposite is for the sake of being opposite. It's like, no. There has to be an engagement here in such a way that the world is attracted, intrigued, and sees the gospel, sees Christians as approachable to ask those questions. Like, I think it's good to have heathen friends. Mm-hmm. Like, it's good to have, so that they can say, oh my gosh, wait, why won't you come out on Friday with us? Well, you guys are going to a Brazilian steakhouse and it's a Friday in Lent. I'm not doing that.
Yep.
Okay, well, tell me more. Because you have a relationship now, it's intriguing, it's approachable. I mean, I get more questions because I wear a habit in public than anything else. People are intrigued by freaks. They see me as weird and they see me as a freak, but they're intrigued by that.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a certain ability to approach and ask that question. But if I never engaged with that, or, you know, either, like you said, go to the deficiency and just wanted to be part of the herd, or went so far that I never engaged in the world, then like there isn't that ability.
And there is, so we don't sound Protestant, of course, at least I'm always mindful of this.
Yeah.
There is, if just weird for weirdness' sake, which isn't weird for weirdness' sake in this case, of like a monastery or going away and being a hermit or something. But that's, I mean, we could have a whole episode about that, how in the sense that that's actually, like, since you're meant ultimately for conversation with God, that's the most normal thing you could imagine, because that's what eternity is. And so even though, like, this is the religious sense of going away might be like super, and not, I mean, sisters, you know, nuns, for instance.
Cloisters,
cloistered who never go out, and you think they're not engaging with the world. And you're like, no, they're praying for the world, and they are, like, actually, we are weird compared to them in terms of what it ought to be, because we're meant to be in full relationship with God, and they've chosen and have a special calling for this. So we're not saying and get rid of the monasteries.
No. Yeah.
But for most of us who are not, even the Dominicans, who are not called to live in this this full life in that way,
that kind of more eremitical or cloistered vocation is a fruit of the gospel in this world.
That's right.
Like, it has a place in that, but it of itself, like, it doesn't make sense without and what we just talked about leading up to that.
That's right.
Which I think is important, because once again, to see those in cloisters or in monasteries, it's like, that's, you know, we have to maybe give somebody an on-ramp to understand all of that. And that's kind of the gospel in the world. And every cloistered religious, every hermit that I know of, started in the world.
Yeah. Sure, had to be attracted to it.
Exactly.
So to get there, the ladder was there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say, I guess, as we're wrapping up, I'm thinking the best thing about the weirdness question is I should ask myself, if I say that's weird, I should say to myself, is it? Because ideally, that's what we want people to come to us in Christianity and Catholicism as friars or as lay people, and initially say, hey, that's weird what you do.
Right.
And then our response should be something like,
yeah.
Is it? It is. It seems weird.
Yeah.
But if you think in terms of eternity, is it that weird? And then he says, it's still kind of weird. You say, well, come and see. Come and see. It only looks weird from your side, as it should, because you don't believe in X, Y, and Z. But if you come in, you actually see this is how we do things.
And I think the encouragement is for us as Christians and Catholics to embrace that. To say, like, I get it. From your perspective, that's wildly weird. Yeah. And I'm weird. Like, I will embrace that.
To you.
Yeah, but let's talk
I'm
about
not weird
it.
to my brothers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah,
I think if your immediate
explain that.
Yeah, if your immediate response is, "Hey, that's weird," like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," I don't like. Yeah, you're right. I know. It's kind of weird. Like, it's just something I do. It's like, no. Just be like, yeah, I embrace that. Like, that's once again, this isn't just because of an affiliation, but this is who I am.
Yeah.
And yes, absolutely.
And it's for a reason.
Absolutely.
Not weird for weird's sake.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for all listening to us on this podcast of Godsplaining. Please like and subscribe and share this with anyone who you think could use a little more dose of weirdness or lack of weirdness or too much weirdness or what it might be. If you'd like to donate to us, you can do so on Patreon, the monthly donation. Thanks for all those who do that. Announcements: we have an all-comers retreat coming up in June. You've heard this probably a few times. You've been listening to more than this episode. But it will be in Providence College. It'll be at Providence College in June. You can find information on the website down in the show notes and links to information about how to sign up and register for the all-comers retreat in Providence this summer. So please know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll catch you next time on Godsplaining.
Father Bonaventure, if you had to choose between getting Warby Parker glasses, subscribing to a YouTube channel, or flossing your teeth, what would you choose?
Oof. I guess, to be honest, subscribing to a YouTube channel.
See, folks, it's not as bad as flossing your teeth or getting Warby Parker glasses. Please subscribe to Godsplaining. Cheers.